Ugh, sorry. This is essay 32. The legal challenges and ending segregation in the South. The most significant civil rights organization in the first half of the 20th century was the NAACP. This organization was a civil rights organization in the USA, formed in 1909 as an interracial effort to advance justice for African Americans. The NAACP's tactics focus on litigation and aim to bring about a slow yet steady erosion of Jim Crow laws. The NAACP's legal challenges to segregation, including especially in education, were vital in removing Jim Crow laws and inspiring further Black activism. Victory for the NAACP's long legal campaign against segregated education was won in the Supreme Court in Brown v. Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, 1954. Kansas was one of the 17 states that had legally segregated schools. The NAACP supported Oliver Brown's litigation. He was a church minister in Topeka, Kansas, and could not send his daughter to a whites-only school, which was only 5 blocks away. He had to get his daughter to school, but to the all-black school, which was 20 blocks away, and she had to walk across railroad tracks. Brown decided to challenge the school system. The NAACP and Brown believed that there was a good chance of success since Kansas was not a southern state. Thurgood Marshall argued before the Supreme Court that segregation was against the 14th Amendment. In Brown v. Board, the Supreme Court had adjudged that even if facilities were equal, they never were. Separate education was psychologically harmful to Black children. The Brown ruling was highly significant because it became a great success for the NAACP's long legal campaign against segregated education. Brown v. Board removed all constitutional sanctions for racial segregation by overturning Plessy v. Ferguson. The victory was not whole, as the Supreme Court gave no date to which desegregation had to be achieved, and said nothing about de facto segregation. The NAACP returned to the Supreme Court and obtained the Brown II in 1955, ruling that integration would be accomplished with all deliberate speed. However, there was still no set date. The court's hesitancy combined with the steadfast local resistance meant that the bold Brown v. Board education ruling did little on the community level to achieve the goal of desegregation. Black students still attended schools with substandard facilities, out-of-date textbooks, and had no basic school supplies. In 1955, a case known as Brown v. Board II, the court gave much of the responsibility for the implementation of desegregation to local school authorities and lower courts, and they urged them that the process will be executed with deliberate speed. However, many of the lower court judges in the South who had segregationist policies resisted desegregation. In Prince Edward County, the Board of Supervisors refused to appropriate funds for the county school board, choosing to shut down the public schools for 5 years rather than integrating them. In 1956, 82 representatives and 19 senators endorsed a so-called Southern Manifesto in Congress, which urged Southerners to use all lawful means at their disposal to resist the quote-unquote chaos and confusion that desegregation would cause. After large pressure from the local chapter of the NAACP, the Little Rock, Arkansas School Board adopted a plan for gradual integration of its schools. The Arkansas NAACP carefully vetted and counseled a group of students and determined if they all possessed the strength and determination to face the incoming resistance. The group soon became famously known as the Little Rock Nine. The Arkansas National Guard, under orders of Governor Faubus, prevented any of the Little Rock Nine from entering the doors of Central High. Photographs of students being harassed by mobs of adults were printed and broadcasted widely in the United States and abroad. Additionally, on-site television reporting was pioneered at Little Rock. This media coverage brought the Little Rock controversy to national and international attention. A federal judge ordered the Arkansas National Guard to be removed, and the Little Rock Police Department took over to maintain order. The police escorted the 9 African American students into the school through angry mobs. A riot ensued, and the police removed the 9 students. Little Rock's mayor told President Eisenhower that the mob was out of hand and begged him to act upon it. Escorted and protected by federal troops, the Little Rock Nine attended their first full day of classes on September 25th. Although the NAACP tried to push desegregation along faster at Little Rock, there was no dramatic nor immediate improvement. Governor Faubus decided to close the schools rather than to integrate. Eisenhower did not respond. It was not until 1960 that Central High School was integrated. Little Rock showed that Supreme Court rulings like Brown met tremendous resistance in the practice. In 1964, a full decade after the Brown decision, more than 98% of black children in the South still attended segregated schools. A series of civil rights campaigns, which eventually resulted in the 1964 Act, included the Montgomery bus boycott in 1956, the 1960 sit-ins, Freedom Rides, SCLC's Birmingham campaign, the March on Washington. These nonviolent campaigns were not always immediately successful, and they were often met with unlawful and unpunished violence. As a result of civil rights As a result of the series of civil rights campaigns and support from Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. 2 provisions within the Civil Rights Act of 1964 effectively gave the federal government the power to enforce school desegregation for the first time. The Justice Department could sue schools that refused to integrate, and the federal government could withhold funding from segregated schools. Within the 5 years after the Civil Rights Act took effect, nearly a third of black children in the South attended integrated schools. That figure reached nearly 90% by 1973. While desegregation occurred, a Supreme Court ruling in 1973 had far-reaching effects on the rest of the country. In Keyes v. Denver School District No. 1, the High Court ordered schools that were segregated, not by law, but through discriminatory housing patterns, to desegregate. Busing became one of the most dominant political issues of the decade. From 1968 to 1976, the percentage of black students attending racially isolated schools in the United States dropped significantly. However, some schools never desegregated. Rapidly built private academies served as a method of defactoring segregated schools. Sorry, I said that wrong. These private academies became pretty much segregated schools. Milliken versus Bradley in 1974 was a significant United States Supreme Court case dealing with the planned desegregation busing of public school students across district lines. In 1974, a watershed Supreme Court decision barred any city from achieving racial balance in schools by busing children from adjoining suburbs, even if that meant crossing district lines. The ruling effectively ended the possibility of meaningful racial desegregation in many urban areas. Still, communities nationwide did desegregate, some with striking success. Children starting kindergarten in the late 1960s were more than likely ever to attend a racially mixed school. In the 1970s, unprecedented numbers of Black, White, Latino, and Asian students moved through their elementary years and into high school together. Lastly, in the early 1980s, public schools in the South, once bastions of the Jim Crow segregation, became the most integrated schools in the United States. Some historians argue that the effort to desegregate public schools across the United States, which was a major goal of the civil rights movement, had become very successful. These historians argue that the following Brown v. Board education decision in 1954 authorized the federal desegregation enforcement in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Supreme Court's 1968 Keyes v. Denver District No. 1 rulings. The United States experienced a sharp decline in school segregation, especially in the South. Other historians argue that the effort to desegregate public schools across the United States had been a modest success. Despite their initial successes, the 1974 Milliken and Bradley Supreme Court decision barred cities from achieving racial balance in schools by busing children from adjoining suburbs, even if that meant crossing district lines. Historians argue that this effectively ended the possibility of meaningful racial desegregation in many urban areas. The inability to bring low-income minority students from an underfunded school district to a better-funded and more diverse middle-class school in a neighboring school district had led to hundreds of de facto segregated schools where most of the kids never graduate from high school and none of them were prepared for college.